This episode of Brains on Games will preview a tableau-building game about colonizing Venus. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we are going to talk about a game that's all about building cities in the clouds on Venus. It's a game that was sent to me very recently and that's coming to Kickstarter very soon. So I will put the campaign information in the show notes of the video. It's a game called Cities of Venus. This is a game for between 2 and 4 players. Now the box says age 14 and up, but I think that the rules are simple enough that the younger kids can figure this one out. And it's a game that plays in about 15 minutes per player. So you're going to be playing in about 30 to 60 minutes. Let's take a deeper look at Cities of Venus. Cities of Venus is a light to medium strategy game where a lot of what you're doing is drafting cards that you're going to slot into your city board, and you're going to earn victory points according to the upgrades that you build into your city. You'll earn victory points by mining minerals, and you'll earn victory points through the population that's remaining on your board at the end of the game. So it is a game about earning the most points, and you're doing that by drafting cards and improving your player board. Now, this is a prototype, so of course the components are going to change. I know that there are some improvements in the work, and that's going to include a little mining bot, a 3D printed mining bot where you can place your mining die and a little meeple inside. But they've got these beautiful dice that kind of match this neoprene mat that's going to guide where you're placing the cards, and you've got a giant rocket. That's where you keep your V-Nauts. They're not astronauts, they're V-Nauts because they're going to Venus. So you've got all of your V-Nauts stored in there. And then you've got these very clever dual layer player boards. Now each player is going to have one of these, and they're going to be placing V-Nauts on it as they play the game. And as I said, you're drafting cards and you're slotting them into slots on this board. But the board is clever. I know I thought when I was reading the rules, well, you're going to knock all of your V-Nauts around when you try to slot these cards in. But what they did was they put a little cardboard underneath the V-Nauts with slots in it. So when I slide my card in, there are windows that show everything that you need to see, the number of victory points, the number of V-Nauts that can go in that space on your board, and any symbology that would show up on the card, but it's not knocking these V-Nauts over. The V-Nauts aren't getting in the way because they have this other little piece underneath. Now on the prototype, these pieces were a little bit bendy and it was a little bit touchy to slot the cards in, but I understand that that's something that's going to improve in the final version of the game. You start every round of Cities of Venus. Like I said, this is a card drafting game, but you're going to start with a cloud drop. So these canisters are going to come from Earth. You may not be able to see Earth on this mat, but there's Earth on one side, there's Venus on the other. Any cards that don't get drafted are going to get discarded. This is your discard pile over here on the other side. Now, often you're going to get a card that has a little yellow triangle on it. That's an event symbol, and the events are almost always bad for your V-Nauts. So usually you're going to lose some population from your board because of a disease or what have you. So here you lose -2, and they can come from anywhere on your board. That's a generic V-Nauts picture. Sometimes you'll get cards, well, sometimes there's a +2, sometimes there's not going to be any population growth, sometimes it's going to cancel out the cloud drop. So there are some negative events that are going to happen, and you need to plan ahead to make sure that you have V-Nauts that are spread out through your player board to allow you to pay whatever that cost is, because otherwise you have to pay extra V-Nauts for everyone that's not in the space where you need to discard them from. Once you've resolved those events, the next thing that you have to do is discard one of the V-Nauts from the shield area of your board. The corrosive rain on Venus depletes your shields. Every turn you have to discard one of these guys. So you want to make sure that you place enough V-Nauts in the shield area so that you can protect yourself from needing to discard extra V-Nauts if you run out over there. And that's one of the things about the game that it took us a minute to wrap our heads around. These guys aren't meeples. They're not workers necessarily that you're placing. This is really your currency. You're spending these guys. They're sacrificing themselves in order to go mining or to protect your colony using those shields. Once you've discarded somebody from the shields, then you get to grow your population. That's based on the number of meeples that are in your air supply and in the food section of your board. Then you can decide if you want to go mining. If you happen to have a V-Naught over here in the mining section, you can discard that meeple because mining is dangerous, so you're going to lose him, and then you roll a die, and that's the number of minerals that you're going to get. Minerals are important in this game because they're going to give you victory points at the end of the game. Often you need to spend them to grow your population by an extra meeple or to buy some of those cloud drop canisters that are going to be coming through the neoprene mat here as you play through the game. Once you've done those city actions, then the drafting can begin. I'll move the player board here out of the way, and then you're going to pay a certain number of V-Nauts and possibly a certain number of crystals in order to grab the cards that are here. You can grab one without paying and then put it in later. We won't go into too much detail about that, but if I wanted to maybe upgrade my shields, I would discard a meeple. I don't know if you'll be able to see these symbols. Discard a meeple from the mechanical area, from food, and from power, and one crystal. And once I've done that, I can slot this into my shield space. That's going to increase the number of meeples that my shield area of the board can hold up to 7. Some of the cards also have victory point markers on them. So at the end of the game, if I have this one on my board, this one's going to give me 1 extra victory point, and the victory points are, of course, important. As you're going through the game, you may also decide that you want to place meeples here in this space station that orbits above Venus, the International Innovation Station. This gives you a clue. This is also your cheat sheet where it's going to tell you what the phases are of each turn. But once you put 8 meeples on here, you can turn them in to draft one of these innovation cards from the bottom. And these can be pretty powerful, and they vary each game. So they're randomly assigned. You might get an increase in population, or you might have shields that don't deplete. So there are a number of good upgrades here. This one is a great one, I thought. It limits the population of your mechanics area, but anytime you'd have to discard a V-Naught from that spot on your board, you don't have to discard it. It's free. Now, it is an interesting choice because you have to sacrifice 8 of your V-Nauts in order to get one of those innovations, and the V-Nauts are also worth victory points at the end of the game. So you're giving up some victory points, but you're getting something in return, and it is kind of an interesting push and pull. Eventually, you're going to deplete this stack of cards. It's going to get close to the bottom, and somewhere in the bottom third of that deck there's a number 3 on the back of the card, is going to be an Earth card. Once you hit the Earth card, that's going to be the end of the game, the last round. You'll finish everything up, and then you'll count up those victory points to decide who wins. Now, what skills are you working on when you play a game like Cities of Venus? Well, you are budgeting those meeples, those V-Nauts, in order to make sure that events don't cause you to lose extra V-Nauts, to place them in areas where your population is going to grow as large as possible. You're going to be deciding whether you want to trade those meeples for the potential to get some minerals that also earn you points at the end. You're trading meeples to draft the cards. So you really are budgeting, and you may need to plan ahead, like I said, to mitigate the effects of those events. Sometimes we found ourselves sometimes kind of hoping that we got lucky and the event wasn't going to affect a particular room where we were out of meeples. If you are planning ahead, if you are budgeting and counting up things in order to work towards a goal, what are you doing? Of course, those are examples of the executive functioning skills. Those are skills that you need to work towards a goal, and they're the skills that are involved in any strategy game, especially when you get up to the medium and heavy levels. You really have to focus and pay attention and be organized in your approach to the game. So this is very much a game that's about the executive functions. Final thoughts about Cities of Venus. Well, this is a game where, the components are fun. You've got that rocket ship. You're going to have potentially a little robot that you can put your meeples into. You've got player boards where you're slotting cards in, and I think that those player boards are quite clever. So the components are fun. Even in the prototype, the components were fun to work with. I think once you wrap your head around the fact that your V-Nauts are actually the currency that you're spending a lot of the time in this game, you really are sacrificing those guys in order to build your colony. It's a simple game to learn, a simple game to teach other players. It is quite straightforward, but you are thinking ahead, and we found ourselves in the final rounds doing the math of, if I sacrifice this meeple, is that going to give me more victory points at the end of the game as the end of the game gets closer? So it's very easy to learn, and it's got that tableau building portion, and you're drafting cards to place into that tableau. So if those are mechanisms that you like, it's also replayable. There's a big stack of these cloud drop cards, but you only use a certain number based on the number of players. There's only a certain number of these that are going to be in each game. There are also multiple different kinds of innovations, and only 4 are going to show up each game. So those are determined randomly before you start playing. So you don't really know what you're going to get. So that certainly does add to the replayability. And then finally, I would say that this is a game where it's got that very skinny rule book, which I didn't hold up before, but it's got a very skinny rule book. It's only a few pages of rules, but the last part of the rule book is not even rules to the game. It's about the scientific theories and concepts that are involved here with the idea of colonizing Venus. Had I ever thought, in the news you see talk about colonizing Mars and going to the moon. Not too many people are talking about Venus, so it wasn't anything really that I'd thought about before. But here we've got the theories that are behind this idea that the atmosphere of Venus would allow balloons to float through the air, and at a certain height, that temperature is going to be optimal for humans. But you've got the acid rain that's going to corrode everything. Anyway, there's scientific theories at the end of the rulebook, and I always love when that happens. It's not an educational game by any means, but it certainly did get me thinking as I read through those rules and looked at those theories and information about Venus at the end. Are there downsides, though, to Cities of Venus? Like I said, you've got great components. You've got those mechanisms of drafting and tableau building with a clever player board. You've got replayability because of all of the innovations that might come up in the game. Are there downsides? Well, one thing, and I'm pretty sure this is something that will get addressed through the campaign. One thing that we found was a bit of a hiccup as we played through was that there's no first player marker. So you had to remember who the first player was. Now, normally that wouldn't be anything that's challenging to do. However, there's so much at the beginning of each turn and the end of each turn that's sort of simultaneous because you're doing your own tableau, that we'd have to think about, okay, well, who gets to draft first when it comes to the cloud drops? So it would be nice to have a first player token to just make it easy to keep track of that as the first player, the opening player, the first guy who gets to draft one of those cloud drops. You want to know who that is, and you want to make it easy to figure that out. The other thing is that it is not a game about player interaction. There's no take that mechanisms. The events kind of are take that for everybody, but there's no way that I can affect the other player's tableau. I can't attack their colony in any way. I can't affect anything that they're doing. The only interaction is by drafting the card that the other player might want. So it is a game where you're all, this is why you can play most parts of your turn can be done simultaneously, because it is a game where everybody's kind of building their own thing. And you're competing to build the best thing, but there's no player interaction. And I know that's something that is important to some players. And that, in a nutshell, is Cities of Venus. Thanks so much to the folks over at Tin Robot Games for sending this game my way. Like I said earlier, I will put information about the crowdfunding campaign in the show notes. If you have any suggestions or comments, you can leave them in the comments section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. BrainsOnGames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go. The previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.